Come in, don't be shy.
Scaring everybody
Is that everyone?
Come in, don't be shy. I'm gonna go lickety-split, get you out of here.
Well, thank you all for coming today and joining us for our inaugural Taste of the Arts lecture series. It's this new thing, we're wanting to collaborate more with Lamar and get more faculty and Lamar students involved. And do we have any Lamar students in the audience? I'm just curious. Hey, what? Did we talk to your class? Oh, good. Okay, awesome. So we're very excited y'all are here. And it's my pleasure to introduce, I know many of y'all know Keith Carter, but he was just a natural fit to come in and speak on Deborah's exhibition. He and Deborah have known each other for a long time, and I'm sure Keith will go into that. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our speaker. Keith Carter's haunting, enigmatic photographs have been shown in over 100 solo exhibitions in 13 countries. 13 books of his work have been published along with 2 documentary films, A Certain Alchemy and Keith Carter, The Artist series. Called a Poet of the Ordinary by the Los Angeles Times, he is the recipient of the Texas Medal of the Arts. Mr. Carter has been featured on the arts segment of nationally televised CBS Sunday Morning and is the recipient of the Lena Taylor Prize from the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University. His work is included in numerous private and public collections, including AMSET. We do have some of his work on view in the Kahn Gallery right now, a photographic series. The Art Institute of Chicago, the National Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the George Eastman House, and the Whitliff Collections at Texas State. A gifted and insightful teacher, Keith Carter holds the endowed Wallace Chair of Art at Lamar University here in Beaumont, where he was awarded the university's highest teaching honors, the Regents Professor Award and Distinguished Faculty Lecturer Prize. So thank you so much, Keith, for sharing your time.
in December, so
Yes.
that would make really good Christmas presents. So just
Coming
keep that in
up.
mind.
Well, bless your hearts for coming. How many of you have read the, we'll call it the catalog right over there in the corner? A number of you. Well, let me tell you, I first met Deborah Luster, who I'll refer to as Debbie, about 25 years ago up in Maine, where I was teaching a workshop, and she was a participant in my workshop. And I immediately grew fond of her. She was well-read, she was articulate, she was a good storyteller, and it took me about one day to figure out there was no reason for her to be there. She was really, there was nothing I could really teach her. She was just that good, and we stayed friends for years. But what I want to tell you is, in those days, 25 years ago, she was doing, I'll call it Southern motif subject matter or Southern vernacular culture. But at that first meeting, we had a class party at my little casita up there, and that's where she first told me the story of her mother being murdered, which I didn't know her well enough. I didn't think she would make that up, but it was just such a harrowing story. Which brings me to what you see here, because that Southern period in her work didn't last all that long, and she pretty much gravitated toward, for lack of a better term, the world of crime. She was really interested in incarcerated people and criminal aspects. I brought a couple of, and then some years back, around 1998, she published this book called One Big Self, and she did what's called wet plate photographs, which is an 1860s process. And she went to 3 prisons in Louisiana, one of them being Angola, which is what we're going to talk about. Wet plate process, they were small, they're this size. That's an 1860s process. There was a one-of-a-kind image before we had negatives, and it's a mixture of ether, alcohol, and gun cotton you mix together. You coat a plate, and you have to process everything after you make the photograph right away, within 7 minutes, and then you have one-of-a-kind image. It's a warping chore, okay? Not for sissies. And they're just riveting. She also partnered up with a writer, a poet, C.D. Wright, and it's an interesting book. And then a few years back, she had moved to New Orleans, which is going to bring me up to this work. She had moved to New Orleans, and she combed through the New Orleans newspaper, the Times-Picayune, I believe it is, and she found articles on sometimes innocuous and sometimes horrific crimes that had been committed in the last few years in New Orleans. Then she took the police blotter or the archive from the newspaper, made copies of that, and then went and found the addresses and photographed these innocuous fields or hotel room banister or alleyways where terrible things had happened. And they looked so ordinary. And it was the juxtaposition of the two together in this form, which really is kind of riveting. And she used a circular motif because it was like looking through a peephole, she said. So, and she did black and white. She still prefers black and white, which is a huge part of the history of photography. Color, of course, in the digital world is the du jour, and a wonderful thing in its own right. She says in this group of pictures, and she says this for years, she just doesn't want the seduction, quote unquote, of color. She wants you to look at the bare bones. Now, that's an arguable point, but that's what she's done. Coming up to this work, I've been to Angola prison twice. In the 90s, I was sent there for 5 days by the New York Times Magazine to do an encompassing photographic essay on that. And it has about 4,800 prisoners at that time, and it still does. It's bounded on three sides by the Mississippi River, and it's a town in itself. The guards live on town. They have farms there. They have everything. It was a strange place, as you might imagine. Then I went back about 8 years later, again for the New York Times Magazine, to photograph a prisoner on death row. The point of this is, Debbie makes the point that Louisiana, for so many years, had arcane laws on their books. And Angola, 2/3 of their prisoners are there for life. And you can be sentenced to life, or you could at that time, those laws are changing, if you weren't the one that committed a crime, but you were just at the scene of the crime, or a friend of the person that did that kind of thing. So there are all these arcane laws. I went there to photograph a man on death row because he had been sentenced to death. This is one of the arcane laws. But they were giving him experimental drugs in order to make him, he had been sentenced to death. They couldn't execute him because he was found insane. So they were giving him experimental drugs to turn him sane again so they could execute him. I don't make that up. That was the point. I was there to make portraits of him, which was a peculiar experience. Which brings, so she's done a number of things, but she made friends with one of the female wardens at Angola and did an extraordinary body of work, which was in that One Big Self book. And then a few years ago, she gets a call from the same female warden who was in Europe saying she just visited some prisons and they had a passion play at the prison. And she wanted to come back and do that at Angola. And that Debbie should come and photograph, which is what happened. And in this group of pictures, she used what's called she used film, even though this is only 5 years ago, more or less, when she did this work. It's a digital realm, but she used film. So these are all what we call silver gelatin prints. And the point I want to make here is they're gorgeous. They're really technically gorgeous. But in the film world, silver gelatin prints, properly processed like this, will last up to 2,000 years. That's the archival life. Most of you don't care, but museum people care a lot. The digital world, which we love, generally what they call archival, or we call archival now, is roughly 160 years, which is longer than we live, so most people don't care. But if you wanted something to last a long, long time, you did it on silver gelatin paper, and you used this process. They're all done with natural light, and they have a rodeo arena at Angola, and they have little stalls. And she said she brought the people who were going to be in the play. They had made their own costumes, and she photographed about 17 of them, I believe, in the series. And she just had them kind of in different stalls. It's dirt and so on and so forth. She used natural light, and you've probably seen them in movies and what have you. She used reflectors, so there's no artificial light going on here. But the thing is, from my standpoint, and you can ask yourself the same question, or make the same determination, she's used what we call a lot of negative space. She's put up a black background in a rodeo stall, and the only thing that counts is what's in front in the camera. And then she's had them wear their costumes they made. But the thing that's so beautiful, and it goes straight back to 19th century photographic portraiture and earlier portraiture, is they don't smile. And if they were smiling, which we have a penchant to try to get people to do all the time, that'd be a completely different photograph. Visually and psychologically and et cetera, et cetera. But she said she did not talk to them. And she said, just do what you want. Well, pretty much if you don't talk to somebody, being a portrait photographer part of my life, is they pretty much just start to become themselves. You know, you just kind of trying to figure out what you want or whatever, and they just start to look at you. But I call it the look. And everybody has it here. It's the look. You couldn't get that from them if you were Richard Avedon or whoever you want to pick as a great portrait photographer. You just couldn't get that. They have to do that themselves. You have them sit so they're comfortable. Because if you don't have them sit, and you point a camera at somebody, and they're not leaning against something, they don't know what to do. They stand like this. If you have time or you're bored, you put all your weight on one foot and you start to look comfortable. But otherwise, they don't know what to do with the hands. They just stand like this. So it made it classical, and quite elegant and fierce, just kind of fierce. Now, the film, which goes on for about 20 minutes plus with an eerie soundtrack, and this is the last part I'm going to tell you. She said she was inspired by Andy Warhol's film stills, which are excruciatingly boring in my world. But she loved them. Andy Warhol at one point pointed his Bolex film camera at people in the factory where he worked or the hangers-on and just told them, don't say anything, just stare at the camera. And he pointed the camera and he did these long films of people just staring at the camera. Nothing happened. That kind of thing. And she saw this in a film festival, and she just became intrigued. So she did the same thing on this, not a video, it's an actual film. She purchased secondhand a 35 millimeter film movie camera. She said it was like making Ben-Hur. It's a big camera. And if you look at that, these are many of the same prisoners. They're in rotating, they show up on the screen in rotating manner. But the quality, I'm a practicing photographer, so I'm knocked out. The quality of that as opposed to a video is just stunning, absolutely stunning. It's an eerie soundtrack. I personally think it sucks, and I told her that, but she didn't care. She has her reasons, and that's what artists do, and I say that's great. I think it's wonderful, and I think this show makes me wish I could see all 17 of them up, that kind of thing. But it's work by a woman at the height of her powers, clear on what she's trying to do, knowing full well it doesn't resonate with everybody in this room, but that's not why she does it. So that's pretty much what I know to tell you in my adamant fashion. Do you have a question?
Do you know what size camera she was using to do?
She's using a Hasselblad, and it's a 2¼ inch negative, okay? And a roll of film it's a medium format camera. In the film world, the larger the negative, the better the quality. It's like in the digital world, the more megapixels, the better the quality, or the bigger you can make prints. 35 millimeters, about 1½ inches. This is 2¼ inches. There are 12 frames on a roll. She used a tripod, and she used about f/5.6, which is medium depth of field, but it didn't make much difference because the background's black, so there's no detail there anyway. But
We have this available in the gift shop.
do you?
If you are interested.
That's a startling book.
And then also the benches in there were made by the prisoners in Angola. So if you go in there, and also the rodeo is going on now through the month of October, if you want to go over there. $20 a ticket, it's on Sundays. Takes about 4 hours to get there from here. But if you want to go experience Angola, you can go to the rodeo now.
One more thing I want to tell you. What's in that room is what my colleague Prince and I, or gallery owners such as Betty Moody, or museum people would call experiential art. It's not so much about what's on the wall, it's the experience that you have. And part of that experience is those benches are made by prisoners at Angola that you sit on in the dark to watch this film. So that's part of the deal. But last thing is, since part of my life revolves around beloved students, and they are really fascinating sometimes, I have students come to see the show and write papers. And as always, I was a bit fascinated. But the one thing that kept coming up that people like me, or my generation, don't think of, was kindness or humanitarian thinking or equality, whereas sometimes we have a penchant to think, well, they're there for a reason. They did bad things. Maybe, maybe not. But I was going to read you this is from a 21-year-old student, and I just love this. And this wasn't even an art student. This was a nursing student in the class. Deborah Luster's work captures the complexity of human emotion and individuality. She is in effect saying all these people have done bad things, but they're different and they're individual, and we don't know they actually did them. And even prisoners should retain their individuality. and it's incorrect to try and homogenize a group to suit our interests. Additionally, the passion play and Christian ideas of forgiveness and mercy surrounding Easter add another layer of interpretation to the work. But here's where it's nice. Social issues. I don't think of social issues when I'm listening, but students do. Many recent works have taken up the message of individuality, and the Passion Play finds its place both amongst recent historical works that promote individuality and sanctity of human life. The current genre of dystopian literature, I'm giving her an A. I don't care if she stole it from the internet. The genre of current dystopian literature, such as The Hunger Games, Divergent, has sprung up to convince young adults of their uniqueness. Furthermore, the idea that we retain our humanity, even following descent into crime or evil, is echoed by both historic Christian texts as well as in popular music such as Kendrick Lamar's Good Mad Kid City. That's a rapper, you know? Deborah Luster's work builds on concepts that are inherent to humanity and have been in place for thousands of years. How could you not love that? Whether you agree with it or not, how could you not love that? But if it ain't right, it ought to be. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. It was a delight to listen to you speak about Deborah and just spend more time looking. And I think that's something with this exhibition in particular, it moves so fast all of the time. I mean, especially when you go somewhere and you're visiting a museum out of town or something, you're just like, what all can I get in? And it's really important to sit back and just let it happen and experience work and step back. Sometimes I purposely make myself not read checklists and labels when I go in places, because then I find I'm looking at text and not the work. And Deborah's show really makes me want to think more and kind of spend time with it. So if you haven't checked out the film, be sure to do that. And please do join us in the cafe for lunch. We'll just, whoever wants to sit down and eat, grab a seat and get to know your neighbor. And thank you all for coming. We'll be doing this again probably in February with our next show. We're still working on the speaker for that. But thank you all. I hope I'm not. I don't know that. Oh, it's okay. I went like that.